So today we're going to look at provider state management, and I'm really going to take my time to actually explain the theoretical concept behind it, the provider, and also we'll look at some example on how to use the provider in a very simple app. So if you're a newbie and don't really understand, I'm going to take my time to try to explain the concept behind state management and what you should choose and why you should choose that and what will be the benefit. So and then I'm gonna finish with an example. Okay, so as I have the explanations here for state management. So if we talk actually about a state of an app, is what we will say it is the all the UI together with the asset, together with the animation, texture, font, and what have you on your app that is being stored inside what? A memory. Good. So as and when the app is running, all these are being stored inside the memory. So that is what we call the state or the state of an app. Okay, so we have so many ways to manage the state of an app, and one of them is the provider that is being provided by the Flutter team, and they strongly recommend to use the provider if you don't have any concrete reason for choosing any of the other state management procedures like Redux and the others. So if you don't have any strong reason, then the Flutter team actually recommend this. Okay, so let's look at this here. This is actually a simple app where we have a different widgets attached to it, and this entire thing will be the state of the app. So if you take this, we can have the top widget, then we can have the other widget, and there's a lot of my list item here, which when you add this or add press on the bottom on an event, it should add to cart, and that will be stored inside the cart widget. So it needs to actually inform when there's any changes here inside this, and this have to be monitored in the app. That is the state in the memory. Okay, so let's look at the two different state types. Yeah, so in Flutter we will say we have the ephemeral state and then the app state. Okay, so what's the difference between this? Let's look at the ephemeral state. If we look at here, we'll say every app have data, and then the data has to be spread or shared across other widgets, right? So we say who needs that particular data. And if we take the ephemeral, it's gonna be actually a single widget needing the data. So very simple app with a single widget needing the data, and that might not be complicated to use state management, but instead you can use a state and then set state, which is very easy at the low level, and you can use that to actually manage the state for this ephemeral app where it is using a single widget. Okay, or you can decide to use more set state and state in even a complex and complicated one, but it is not highly recommended. Okay, so when we go to the app state, we will say most widgets will need the data, and some widget will need the data. So either most widgets or some widget will need the data. Then we need to check for the app state in all the app. So this is just one line of widget, so not really important. So if we're gonna have some widgets or most widgets in our app state, then we will consider using a state management. For example, provider. We have others, but today we're going to concentrate on a provider. So we say app state, we use the provider. So The three major concepts behind the provider is the change notifier, the change notifier provider, and the consumer. Let's look at the change notifier. We say it's simply a class that provides what? Change notification to its listeners. So here we will say it's a class we set in our project where it's gonna actually notify other widgets of what? Of a change in a particular part of the UI, and it's gonna pass it on to its listeners or other widgets that is calling the notifier. And then the change notifier provider is a widget that also provide what? An instance of this, provides an instance of this to its what? Descendants. So we have an ancestor will be the first generation, descendant will be the second or whatever generation. So instance means a copy of this, and then it comes from the what? The provider package. So this provider is actually a package, and then we have all this class in there. So next is the consumer, and this is also a widget which is used in the package, and we must specify the type of model that we want to access. So as you set this, you can also have a copy of this or an instant of this, and the same notifier provider. If you want to actually use it in your project, then you need to use this called a consumer, and it's also a widget. Yeah, so this is very easy. But for this, for example, if we say you are using the consumer as a widget, this is when you are trying to use the provider. We need to have a method, and this method simply means the type. So if it's probably simple a class, so maybe we have a class, and this class is a bears the name of maybe NN. So this is the class name. NN is the class name. So we need to simply type in here N and here. And this is what? Actually the method. So we want this class to be notified through the consuming widget. So that is how it's being used inside our project. But we're going to have an example. So let's quickly start with a simple project, and then we're going to demonstrate this. So Flutter create, let's say we're going to use a simple contract. So I create this, and after this is created, we are actually going to add our provider widget, and let me see. So anytime we have to use the provider, we need to do what? First, add this provider package to our project. Receive the field attempting. Okay, let's see. There's a failure here. It's attempting to get it again. Okay, so if we want to use the provider, we need to actually do what? Add this provider package inside our app, and that can be used using these three concepts I talked about. We use this, and then that inside our application. Okay, so this project is being created in a folder here. Yes, and I want it to finish. Then I can actually drag it into the VS Code. Let's wait for a while as this create other files. Okay, so as it's still trying, let me finish with this. Okay, so like I was saying, here is actually what? Calling the model. And this model is simply a name of a class or other part of the code. So we normally have to add what we call the type, and this type should be referred to the class of the function we want to call inside the consumer. So normally this uh, should be added at the top of our project. So the notifier needs to actually uh, be lifted up of our project so that it can actually read and monitor all widgets inside our project. And anytime we want to duplicate or have an instance of this in any part of our widget or code, then we can use the notifier provider or change notifier provider to check and then create the instance of our our change notifier. So anytime we actually want to use this particular notifier inside our project, then we need to consider adding the consumer, which is down there. So the consumer is actually important. So if you don't include the consumer, then you cannot actually access the notifier. Okay, so I think it has finished. Yes, good. So let me actually drag this inside studio. Let me close this one. Okay, so this is set. Let me open our lib, that is the main. I will actually start from scratch, but before that let me run the application here. And I said we need to first add our provider package here. So we can use Command P. Then if you have the pushback assistant, it's very helpful. You can get that for your Visual Studio as well. So we can simply type provider here, and let's press the enter key, and they should actually include our package for us. Okay. Let me do that again. Package. No, provider, sorry. Okay, I think this is running, that's why it's delaying to add the package. Yeah, but let me step into this. It's gonna add. Let this run. It's still checking. Command error. Okay, let this one finish. I'm gonna add it again. Okay, so in order to start our app, let's look quickly here. This actually have this counter up here, but this is not using any state management. Yeah, because it's actually a simple page, but this same is actually using only set state, but this same logic can also you can also add the provider for you to actually grab the concept of using the provider instead of using the set state. Yeah, very simple. And we can just change and then add the provider to this, and this is gonna be very simple. But before that, let me actually clear every code in here, and then we're gonna start from scratch so that you can actually follow line by line. Yes, but first let me check the package first before we continue. Let me see. Okay, so yeah, more easier. Let me see. If it did not include the package, I'm gonna include it. Then okay, so this app is working. That is the demo one, but we're gonna actually change this whole app and then use the provider instead of the set state. But we're gonna use this simple application because I actually want you to understand the concept before we can move to advanced examples. Okay, so let me add this again. Let me add this assistant. Yeah, provider. Yeah, so it's checking the package provider to add to our pushspec.yaml file. And we cannot use the provider if we don't have this package added to our project. So you need to make sure you add this to your project before it can actually be used, and it will make your work really easy to manage the state. There are a whole lot of other states, but this is what Flutter team recommend. Okay, so first, since I want to start from scratch, let me just could not add. Okay, let me quickly check this. Mm, Let me quickly check this here from spec. So yeah, and we're gonna add that from there. So anytime you are trying to add a package and you have issues, you can just pick it from the Flutter repository for packages, and that will be fine. So let me clear everything in here. Yes, okay. So I want to check the provider package here and then include it here. I think the shortcut is not working. Provider. But as it's loading, I'm gonna add import statement, and this will be a normal package import, and package, and this will be Flutter because we're gonna use the material. So you make sure you include this to your project. Okay, so material.dat, but we are also going to include the provider, which I'm about to check. Let me see. Okay, let me check this. I don't know why. Oh, this is really slow. Okay, so let's select the first one, and we're gonna use the first one, and this is let me see. Yeah, I need to first check here to check the poop point and popularity. Okay, so that is very important. So we are going to use the latest one. You can simply copy this, go to your poop spec, and then uh, under your dependencies you can include the provider. Then you save this. You save this to actually what, include the package here. So it's gonna get info for the package provider. Good. So as it's loading, I'm importing the package. So I import, and the package name is what? Provider. So we use provider here, and slash provider. Okay, perfect. Let me see whether it added successfully. Still getting the package. I need to turn on my VPN. Okay, good. So now let's begin. As it's loading, I still begin so that we can actually understand the main concept without wasting much time. So we're gonna start with a normal main, and not necessarily have to need to have this in there. And here we want to actually add the change notifier provider I talked about. And so inside our run app, yeah, inside our run app, instead to have the name of our what, the name of our main class, we'll have to first add the change, because we want the change notifier provider to actually what, take charge. So we will use the change notifier provider in here, and for this we have two or no three parameters we can use here, but let's only use the contexts for the first one because we are setting it up there. So we're gonna actually use an instance of this, and we can call these three parameters we can use. Yeah, so create first here, we use the context here, and then we point it to, we use the fat arrow. Let's use fat arrow here, and we're gonna point it to our main class, which we want the notifier to actually have effect on. So our main class, the name will be counter. Okay, and this counter will inside the crate, which we have our main class. After that, we're now gonna add my app for another class, because we're gonna have two class we want the provider to actually control. So this is actually gonna be a simple class counter to control the functionality, and this is gonna be the my app class for one of our stateless widgets. So we call my app. This can be any name, so it doesn't really have to be my app. Okay, good. So we have this one set. Let me see, for provider you need to actually end it with a semicolon, and then let me see, comma here is okay. and you can put a comma here just for clean code. Good. So we set this one up. Still getting package. Okay. So next, what we want to do is to actually create the class that will be consumed by our change notifier, or it's gonna extend or with the change notifier. So we said these can be used as an instance of our actual change notifier. Okay. So since we want this provider to actually be in charge of our project, we added two what our main entry point for our project. So now let's go to the class for our counter. Okay, so we create this class, then we want to use the change notifier, so we need to use the keyword with change what notifier. Good. That means this is going to monitor our class. If anything changes, then it passes on to our change notifier. And since this is the mother entry, then it's gonna actually check which part of the UI needs to change using the my app class. Okay, good. So here, what we'll do here is to actually add the logic here. So first, let's say we have an int of what? A value, and this value will be set to 0 at the initial stage, and then we'll be having a void increment. So this increment will actually help us to add or increase the number we actually need. So not in here. Okay, so for the increment, we'll take the value here, that is this value, and this value will be plus or equal to, since we want to increase the value 0 anytime we press something or anytime an event happens, right? So we use the plus equal to what? 1. So anytime we press or we call this increment, it should add 1 to the value stored in here. Okay, so then I need to terminate this. Then since this is where most of the changes is gonna happen, we need to add what we call the notifier listener. Very important. So this is actually gonna listen to any change inside this this simple function. So this one, anytime it's changed, then this will know, and this is gonna pass it to our change notifier, pass it here, and then down to the UI. Okay, so let me end this. Perfect. Why do we have the error here? Because we have not created this one. So let's check. Now we're going to create a stateless widget, and then we're going to have the name of my class here for this stateless widget. Okay, so let me create that first. Stateless stl, I'm using the shortcut for stateless widget, and the name will be my app because it has been already defined at the top. Good. So my app extends a stateless widget. Okay, so let's look at the build. Inside the build, instead to return a container, we want to return, let's return material. Yeah, material app, and this will have our title here, which will not be shown. So you can leave this. Yeah, so let's say Flutter provider. Yeah, okay, and we want to add a theme to our application. It's a simple theme. and then we use the team data. Let's use, no, I don't want to use, let me use team data. And for our team data, we're gonna add a primary class to our application. So let me open this and then add a primary. No, instead to add a primary color, add a primary swatch. Okay, and this will be what? Let's add colors to this. So colors dot any color you want. Okay, but we'll keep this blue. Okay, perfect. This is just adding a default color to your project. Yeah, just to override what Flutter provides. So after our theme, we need to add our home class. And let's say this home class, we're gonna keep it constant because it did not change. And let's call another class my home. That is where the actual UI is gonna go. My home page is okay. Good. So now we have to create this. My what? My home page. What's happening here? Okay, good. So my home page. Now we're gonna create this my home page, and my home page is actually gonna have the UI display of the counter. So I want you to actually understand this very well. That is why I'm taking my time to go through this. Okay. This is gonna have an error because the test is having a constant, and let me see. Okay. Okay, I got it. So let's finish. I'm gonna solve that. So let's see. This one, since we have our home page, let's add the another stateless widget here, and this will be called what? My home page. Okay. Then for this my home page, we're gonna return the real UI, which will be a scaffold. So scaffold, and for this scaffold we actually gonna have our app bar defined here. So app bar, then we have the app bar, and for our app bar we simply gonna have simple title, and this title will be a test. So let me use the constants. Does not really have, it does not really have to add that, but it's okay. Then let me add, let's say, demo for provider. Okay, good. That's the title of our app bar. Then after our app bar, we want to add the body of the main project. Okay, so the body, we want to keep it inside a center widget, and inside the center widget, first we're going to look at a column, but before the column we need to add a child. So column, yeah. So inside this we need to have our children in here. Okay, good. So for the children, first let me align this well before we add the children. We're gonna use the main axis, main axis, but let's use center. We want this to be in the center. So then first we're gonna have our test displaying what the counter it's gonna do. So we'll only have to say, okay, showing a number after on press or on click. Yes, okay, good. Then here, next we're gonna have our consumer inside this body, because this is where it's gonna display to the user to see the number of count displaying anytime a user clicks on something. So this is where the consumer is gonna be. So I said we are using what, three stuff here. Change notifier, very important because it monitors anything that changes inside our what, our functional class. So this has the logic of the what, of the counter. And when any changes happen here, this listener is here to help this know that there's a change here. And this is an instance of what, of this. So if it has this instance, then it's going to pass it down to our UI, and then our UI is going to come here. Then our UI will actually pass it to the other class that we have here, and this class will be displaying this on the screen. So let's watch here. Now, how to use the consumer. Okay, so we type the keyword as I explained inside our Word document. So consumer, okay, so this consumer, I told you it actually have a model or a type. Okay, so where do we place the type? First, let me push this one down. Let me be clear here. Here is what? Is simply the type of what? Of our class up there called consumer. This one. Or counter rather. Sorry. This counter. This is what we are calling here. And this is the model. And this model should be here as the type. Okay, like this. And let me now go this. No. Okay, so for the consumer, it takes three parameters. The first, we need to have the build before we add the parameters. So build here, and this build will have three parameters. We have first will be context, and second will actually be a builder or the type. So the builder will simply be something like a name we're gonna use like a variable, and the next one will be the child that we'll use to append to our other display. So the child, and so you need to always remember this. It has three parameters. This can be changed based on your preference. Yeah, so if this is counter, you can use a counter here. If this is BB, you can use BB here. But this is small letter and that is capital letter. So depending on what you want to use. So context child. Okay, then so the next one, the child here will be our text. Before that, I do this tests. Okay, and this test is where the display happens. Okay, so inside the test, let me see. Let me have a comma here. Comma for the consumer. So for our test, first we're gonna call the value to display in this test widget. Okay, so first I have to actually do this. call the dollar sign, and then add first the counter, where from this one dot the value from our counter class value, and where from this value, but make sure we put this inside double or single quote. Okay, so this value is from here. Where is that? Oh, why do we have all this import? We don't need this. Okay, so let me see. This one, this value is equal to 0, and we have the value inside our increment, and the value holds the incremented numbers here. So that is why we call counter dot value. Means this builder needs to monitor this counter and append it to the value. So next, let's style how this display. This is a normal styling. This got nothing to do with our consumer. We are just styling what shows to the user. Okay, so theme, the theme we use at the top. So I call theme of what? Context, which I use in at the top there to override Flutter's default theme. Okay, so tests, I use the test theme dot headline. Headline just want it to be bold, so I use the headline 4, just like HTML. Good, perfect. You have this. Let's take out the constant, not necessary. Not necessary. Let me delete the tests. We have no time to check this. Okay, so now everything is okay here. Then we're gonna add an action to this. Now we have all our logic. Now we know how to use the consumer in our project. We know how to use second, we know how to use the change notifier, and then we know how to use the instance of the change notifier for our general app. Okay, so now I'm gonna add an action to this. To add an action to this, I need to add a floating action button to this. So floating action button should be out of the center widget. So let me call this floating action button, and then we call our floating action button here. Okay, and for this we're gonna use the onPress. Okay, so for the onPress, let me see, we're gonna have an anonymous function. So double click this, and I open this wide. Okay, so anonymous onPress. Then we have a variable, and this variable will be counter. Then we're gonna set it to our context dot read. Take note of this. Read what? What are we going to read? We're gonna read first. Let me be very sure here. Read. We're gonna read this. The type is important here. We are gonna read our counter. Okay, good. So we have read, and then we have watch. So we have context.watch and context.read that is being used by the provider. Why do we use the context.read? This context.read is actually used outside of what? Outside of our main widget, where if we had this inside the widget, we can use what? The context.watch. But the difference is that the context.watch normally have to rebuild the entire page, which it's it's not necessary when we have the widget outside of the what of the main body, right? But if we had it inside here, then we can use the context.watch counter, and that will rebuild this side. But since this is outside, we use the read, and read will only build a part of the project or the widget, so that it should not cause too much pressure on our application. Okay. So that is the reason I'm using the context.read, and this is part of the provider package. Okay. So now let me make use of the variable that is counter dot increase, and this increase is a function inside our class up there. Good. Let me just add a toolbar here. When you hover on the floating action button, you're gonna know what it does. So single quote, then add increment. Okay, then I will add a plus icon here, so a child, and then you can use constant or not. Okay, let me use the icon, and icons dot add. Okay, we're using the add icon. Good. Okay, so let's have a quick overview so that you actually understand the provider, as I did explicitly explain inside our word on the word part. And this, so we said the state is what? All the UI asset, everything we have on our app being stored in the memory. Okay, so in order to control the flow of memory, we need to use a state management, and this is provider, which is provided by Flutter team. And this is all what? Different aspect of a project, that is different widget, and we should be able to pass data from any of the widget to any part of it. Good. But to do that, we need to use a trick, and this trick is we need to know how our project is gonna be. If we have the ephemeral state project, then we need to only use the set state or the state here. And if we have more widgets gonna pass data across, or some widgets gonna pass data across, then using a state management is recommended. Okay, so we said three concepts we need to understand is the change notifier. This is actually the main class that actually provides the change notification and listener, but this is used to create an instance of this. And so if it creates an instance, anytime this checks, okay, it creates an instance, then it can be passed down to our application and check where the consumers are, and then communicate with it. And this, in this, we have specified a particular model or a type, and that particular model will be rendered and then updated. Perfect. Good. So that is all what we have here. So we have to include our provider in our postspec. We included the provider here, and where is it? Under our dependency. Good. And then here I included this provider. So we have a change notify listener instance of our change notifier, and this is the core the core logic of the project. So this has what? The change listener, and this has the instance of it. So we put this at the top to actually control our app UI, get the data, and then pass it to our first UI, which is the main one. And this first UI also passes through our second what UI, and this UI, this is actually received here, received, and also update the other apps. Okay, so this consumer.value, and this is actually called here this value, and we have the counter being here to actually communicate with this consumer, and then how it's gonna display on our app. So anytime this is clicked, and when this is clicked, it's called our counter dot increment, and then it's actually what? That's why we use the context dot read. It actually reads the data, pass it to, reads the data from here, pass it to our instance. Our instance also pass it to our UI. Good. So this will be the basic tutorial for how to use the provider, and it's really simple. So this simple example, I hope it's gonna be a bit clearer. If it's not 100%, we're gonna actually also add other projects using providers, so you can watch all those videos, and I think by the end of that you'll be perfectly good at using provider. Okay, so here this is what we did, and it's actually working perfectly, and we're gonna say peace to this. If you have any question, you can actually leave it on the comment section. If you have any recommendations or any videos you really want to know about Flutter, you can actually write it down below, and we're gonna get back to you. We said peace, and I'm out.